Hi everyone, I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot. Today I'm going to be giving you my total recall verbally of the kind of information I got from Mark Richards. So this is a prisoner that I go and interview in Vacaville, California, and he's at a prison there, and he has been framed for a murder he didn't commit. He's what we call a political prisoner. His name is Captain Mark Richards, and he's worked in the secret space program along with his father and grandfather. So he is third generation, I guess you might say, in our secret space program. As a result, he has a great deal of knowledge. He was also in the program since he was a very young boy and recruited at a very young age, on top of having a family, family members in the projects. So his knowledge is quite extensive as a result of that, in spite of the fact that he's been in prison now for, in essence, actually a little over 30 years. So this is based on my 7th interview with Mark Richards. It is my total recall based on my notes that I take at the scene, at the prison, with the help of his wife, Joanne Richards. And I want to thank her for making these interviews possible. And also, I do an audio recall right after I leave the prison of everything we talked about. In this case, I actually had a list of questions with me, which I haven't been able to do in the past. We sort of snuck those in. And so that was an interesting sort of change. And I had some questions from some of the people who've been following these interviews. So I was able to get some of those answers for people. Although this time we were cut quite short, and that was either by design or accident, I don't know which, but it was quite strange. And I have to say that I only had less than 2 hours, and it's very hard to cover all of the in-depth, just of the questions and the answers that we would love to get from Mark, in that short period of time. So with all of that in mind, I'm just going to proceed here and cover what I've got. So let's see. I was not allowed a pen or a pencil this time. I had to write with a crayon and take notes. It was rather difficult, but I think I succeeded. And so I've also got notes that you can watch or read on my website as you watch this. So I do encourage you to do that. And Mark, the first thing when we got there, it appeared that Mark had gotten some news possibly related to where he might be moved. I don't know what that information is, and it's not clear. We do know he's going to be moved, but it could be another prison block, so to speak, or it could be a whole nother location. So we're kind of going to wait and see what that ends up to be. These interviews are facilitated by his wife, Joanne Richards, who accompanies me to the prison and often helps me take notes as well. In this case, I was able to take my own notes most of the time, and I think we got everything that he was saying, although you never know. I mean, it's always sort of hit and miss when you don't actually have a recording device. So with that in mind, Joanne did have a question in the beginning of her own, because she has been speaking on the circuit, and at one of her events, she had someone ask her a question about his military status regarding his Army and Navy experience. And so what happened was he explained that he was originally in the Army. He was recruited a lot like William Tompkins was at a young age, and he was a lot like Tompkins in the sense that he was chosen because of his talents. And so he started in the Army, and he was in the Vietnam War, and he went from being a lieutenant in the Vietnam War and a helicopter pilot to the Navy at the end of the war. That was a lateral type move. At the end of the war, they were moving a lot of people out of the Army because they no longer needed them. And in Mark's case, he moved over to the Navy, to a lieutenant in the Navy. And then eventually he became a captain. as many will realize by his current title. So he said that the Air Force apparently had no need of extra pilots at that time, so that's why he moved to the Navy, even though he was a pilot. He also was an asset to the Army and Navy because of his best friend, a raptor, which is the raptor dinosaur types. And these are individuals and a race of beings that Mark has had a long-standing relationship with since he was a child. And he used to go on missions for the Army and then eventually for the Navy as well. And you can learn more about the raptors from my previous interviews. And as I say, there are 7 of them. And I believe all of them have also written notes and in some cases transcripts associated with them. So to continue, one of the things I asked him about were the current rumors of what you might call end of the world scenarios, cataclysms, that sort of thing. And Mark said that he definitely felt that he would be warned by his raptor friends who are quite telepathic, as is Mark. And you can see my interview 6 for more of this. But it's the kind of thing he would be notified if there was something impending of a monumental nature. He said there is more of a threat in his view from what he calls nutcase humans than from earth changes. And he thinks government are more worried about that. We talked about Donald Trump, and he did sort of say that he felt that Donald Trump is probably in danger. He said he is considered by the Joint Chiefs as a loose cannon and possibly even maniacal. He thinks that he has never been fully accepted by the Illuminati and that Trump is a real wild card. He says no one really knows what he will do. He thinks he's a lot like Teddy Roosevelt, who had the same kind of a liberal backlash when he was elected. And he hopes that in time, if he survives, that he will do some positive things. He may be remembered, he says, more like Teddy Roosevelt after the fact as a great president. He says that's possible, and he says that he could surprise people and leave a legacy that is good in spite of his bad reputation. He's aware that there is a group behind Trump making this possible, but I have not got any information as to who those people really are. We talked about Hillary Clinton. He thought the real reason Trump won was because no one really liked Hillary. He said she's not trusted. He acknowledged she does report to Bush Sr. and also is supported by Soros. But he does not think she's MJ-12, which is contrary to some other information I have been given about her. So that was interesting. And I have been told that MJ-12, which goes by many names, that she is quite high on the sort of totem pole and is quite in the know about that information. He does not feel she's quite as read in as I do. So for what that's worth. And then also says that he thinks there are a lot of John Wayne types in the military that don't like her, partially because of her, what he says, black magic, drug running with her husband, Bill Clinton, and the pedophilia issue. He thinks that she is evil and has failed trust issues. He also thinks that she is backed by the black magic witch cults, as he called them, and the European Illuminati. With regard to MJ-12, I asked Mark about his dealings with that organization. He said yes, he has had dealings with them, but that apparently his father had a lot more dealings with them, and his father used a lot of different aliases. He doesn't claim to know Mike McConnell, who I was told as head of Defense Intelligence, the DIA, at one point, and then the director of intelligence. He was also head of MJ-12, according to Dan Burish, and stepped down a few years ago. Dan Beers claimed to be put in McConnell's place as head of MJ-12 at that time to me in an email. I don't know whether that is true or not. He talked about Noriega and Bush. He said that Bush, I guess this is Bush Sr., risked everything to get Noriega out of power, that Noriega was threatening to reveal the ET presence. He said Panama is nothing without Colombia. And we talked about Colombia because I was interested in some things that Doc Waterman had said about Colombia, and found out that basically Doc Waterman was saying that because of the medical marijuana sort of transition that our planet is making to, and certainly the states, in making possibly that legal, then what happens is Colombia is trying to sort of get on that bandwagon, according to Doc Waterman. However, the sort of drug cartels are still on the borders and in the neighboring countries. Mark said that that's very possible. He said that there are several ET races that have settled in Colombia because they like the environment. He said they just want to live quietly and be left alone. He said they were chased out of England and Europe, and that they look human and can pass as human. And due to the size of their populations, they now settle in South America and Africa. So that was quite interesting. Regarding the Greys, he said he never considers the Greys friendly. He says they work for the highest bidder. And one example is the Zetas, who are not to be trusted. And there are other races. He said there are a lot of cloned Greys, and they are used by other ETs, also used to perform jobs, translating, and so on. He said that other Grey races include tall greens and tall oranges, and that the Zetas have made Grey clones, as have the Reptoids, who also use Zeta clones as well. Then we talked about the size of the ships that he's been captain of, the Orion ships and also Minerva. The Orion ships' crews go from 32 to 100. He said there was an average crew of 9, but I'm not sure what ship that was for. I'm afraid I didn't get that down in my notes, unfortunately. He did say with Minerva, she doesn't like crew besides Mark. So in general, when he flew Minerva, it would only be her and him, and it would only be Mark and one other person. But she does take groups of zoo animals on board for study, and she can morph her interior to make room for hundreds of animals. She acts as his translator when he is traveling, flying her and going to other planets in other systems. The furthest he's gone interstellar, he says, was with a companion named Glassy, which is out around the Alpha Centauri system. I asked him about interstellar travel to other planets and the beings he's met. He said he has traveled to the 3 stars of Alpha Centauri, has met 20 different species. He said there are 4 different ant colonies in the Orion constellation. However, that when he's traveling, Minerva is very protective, often won't let him leave the ship due to dangerous conditions, and she treats humans a little like pets or children. He also said not all wormholes are the same. I didn't actually get an elaboration on that, and I should have, and hopefully will in the future. He said Greys are often used as translators, as I said, between races of beings, and he said he has used Greys to communicate with some races, and that, again, when he's flying Minerva, she handles that. We talked about the Raptor ships, and there's one very elegant one called Moonraker, which my partner Neil Sanford has put on our poster, our banner for this interview, so you can take a look at that. It's very streamlined, triangular, with a scoop-like back end. Mark actually drew that on my piece of paper when I was there, so he drew a very rough drawing of that, and then Neil has elaborated on our speculation on what the Raptor ship might look like. And it's called a Top Interceptor high-speed attack craft, and its name is Moonraker. Let's see, we talked about the tunnel systems in Vietnam and the Far East because I was interested a little more in hearing more about that. We did cover the spiders in Vietnam, the spider beings that are the size of VWs in Vietnam on my 6th interview, and you're welcome to go back and listen to that again. If you haven't already, encourage you to do so. And he said that those tunnel systems are in the whole sort of Southeast Asia area, as well as Vietnam. They are created in part, he says, by the vortexes and water. And he said that the Viet Cong were using them during the Vietnam War. You could fly a helicopter inside some of those tunnels. We did talk more about the spider beings. I wanted to know about the relationship of the spider beings to the Viet Cong leaders, and also to the recall of the troops. And he said that they worked with the spider leadership and the Viet Cong leaders. And he also said they used mind control to get the troops to forget who they were really working with, and they used gas to make them forget, so that most troops wouldn't remember anything to do with the spider beings. He thinks it's possible that some soldiers will remember, however. And I talked about one soldier recall from my previous show that I did. I did a show on the spider beings from the Vietnam War, and had a very interesting soldier on my show, as well as some other people calling in, and some other interesting recall from various soldiers in the Vietnam War seems to be leading in that direction, to saying that there may be validity to what Mark is saying, some corroboration out there. One of the things that they talked about were bodies being piled high in sort of pyramid-like, pyramids of bodies that soldiers recalled seeing. And this is something that Mark said was done, and he acknowledged that. He talked about the electronic fence used in Vietnam. He said the first time the electronic fence was used was Vietnam, and that it was actually not for tracking necessarily the Viet Cong movement so much as the spider beings along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And we also talked about gas being used to put whole cities to sleep, as some of my Vietnam vets have told me on my latest show on that subject. And Mark said that this was done then and is also being done now. And he said that villages in Vietnam were put to sleep for 48 hours. And so that is very interesting. He said in this recent North Carolina Outer Banks Islands, there was a power cut, supposedly. That was the news item. So what I've done on my notes is link the two articles about the recent cut in power in that area, and the fact that the governor actually evacuated these people out of the area. The real reason they were being evacuated, according to Mark, is because a portal opened, and that a very dark group, a rogue group of aliens came through and started actually eating people off the beaches in the Barrier Islands area. He said the whole area had to be evacuated under false pretenses so the military could deal with it. They found that they couldn't handle the situation because it required that they didn't have any collateral damage. And usually when they try to close a portal, they use a nuke, or they have in the past. So they enlisted the help of the Raptors to help with their high-tech weapons. And they have special weapons that allows them to target individual individual beings and not have collateral damage, as well as to close portals. He said our technology wasn't sophisticated enough to avoid collateral damage, but that this is now changed. So this seems like a rather recent change. Maybe we, in essence, have now got the technology of the raptors. He said the intruders coming in through the portals were a subspecies of another species, and that we don't know this species very well. He said the situation, he believes, has been handled in that area. He did not tell me what kind of aliens these were, and I am also wondering now if the recent allowing of the hurricanes, very destructive hurricanes, Irma and Harvey, were sort of another episode in this sort of portal war with a certain group coming in, and not really about actually nothing natural, no weather event that's natural. We do know that there are weather wars going on constantly, and so I'm going to try to see if I can find out something more about these particular disasters here in America, because the evidence we have is that they have plenty of technology to be able to turn a storm back out to sea. And the fact that they didn't do that in the case of Harvey and Irma is rather suspicious. And I think Irma is actually happening right now, so I don't know what the final sort of results of that will be. So kind of leave that open for the purposes of this interview. Recall. He talked about the nuclear tests that were done in the past, the fact that the military has been criticized for, doing nuclear tests in Nevada, as well as in Bikini Atoll and other places, such as an island called Los Angeles Island off the coast of the Southern California coast. And that we are dealing with what they call OINTs, which are OINTS, or otherworld intelligences. He said there's 4 such species in the area. He didn't specify what kind of species. He said that these nuke tests were actually efforts to close a portal. And he said there's a huge system of portals in Nevada, and that the nuclear tests there had a lot to do with closing the portals and the gates. And I would say that possibly they have a twofold purpose, that they are also about, obviously, possibly getting nuke tests for the sake of tests, but there seems to be a whole nother level to that. So that's worth noting and quite interesting. He does say that he thinks that we have, due to the way that our military thinks about it, he believes that the reason humans are still on this planet to this day is because the militaries have made clear that they would rather destroy this planet rather than let another race of beings take control. And so that this is the philosophy of the military and the secret space program. And so he believes that that has a lot of the reason behind why we're still in control here. And so I guess that's his way of saying that humans are controlling this planet, although there does seem to be a lot of control being exercised, and I think Mark would agree with this, from the Draco and the reptilians, who are working together but are also enemies out in outer space, I guess. So there's some, quite an intricate story going on behind the scenes as to who's running this place, what kind of, agreements are made. We certainly know some Anunnaki are attempting to run this place. And so there's a very interesting battle, I guess you might say, going on behind the scenes with regard to all of this, We talked about Yellow Book, and I asked him about seeing his own future. I asked him if he was ever hooked up to the technology that the raptors have, and many other races, we're told, that allows a human to see like the history of Earth and also their own reincarnational history. And he said, yes, he was hooked up to such a machine. The raptors have that technology. He said he did see some of the true history of Earth as well in that way. And I also asked him sort of a deeper question having to do with his soul contract and whether or not he felt that he was a victim of circumstances or whether he chose the path he's on as a soul coming in. And he said that he felt that he chose to fight the powers that be, and that is why he became imprisoned. However, he didn't choose to be in prison for 30 years, and he feels that they did, look into his future as they have the ability to do with individuals. They saw that he would be a threat. He feels his biggest threat is questioning authority and also the fact that people tend to want to follow him. And so the powers that be find that to be the greatest threat. He said he, back in 1981, he was pushing the envelope. He said he was uncontrollable and highly arrogant. He said the powers that be basically were sort of, I guess, also afraid of him because his alliance with the Raptors race and his close friendship with one in particular. And they said he questioned authority too much after the death of Titania, the woman he loved. He said that he's been, like I say, a threat because of the fact that he can get people to follow him. Disclosure, Aleppo, and the reptilians that are pushing disclosure. I discussed this in my last interview. He had said that the reptoids were forcing the issue in Aleppo, that the battle there was a very intense battle, in part because the reptoids were building what is in essence a gate, he said, a stargate, and they were looking to bring troops and craft into this dimension. He said they have aircraft-sized carrier craft and that they can bring around 5,000 of their own troops in that way. He said they can take back, however, through the gates, as many as 30,000 to 40,000 human prey, dead or alive. He says they trade human slaves to other races, and those humans are used as slaves and also for genetic engineering purposes. And it's one of their businesses, is what he called it. They have been dealt with for the time being, but this continues, this battle. In the past, he's talked on and off a lot about the battles with the reptilians and the reptoids specifically. I asked him if he thought, though the Syrian war and the areas of the Middle East where the reptoid presence is plentiful, whether they would have memories or recall of encountering them. And he said he felt that some people would have memories of seeing the reptoids. However, it's interesting because Courtney Brown and one of his remote viewers, Aziz, have remote viewed Area 51, and apparently Aziz was aware enough to realize that when he was looking at what appears to be a reptoid or reptilian being down in Area 51 in one of the lower levels, he saw that it would make an attempt to fog over his mind so that he would forget and also not see the being. However, he managed to see beyond that. So it's clear that they have this ability to fog over the human mind and also make humans forget, which obviously helps the secrecy. He did talk about the raptors and what they will do for chocolate or for any kind of technology they desire. He said they often steal or borrow technology from other races. He said that they will kill for anything they want, including chocolate. He said the raptors can see the past energetically. They see the past of Earth and of anyone they choose. However, they often choose not to see the future unless they feel it's mandatory for safety. This goes against their sense of ethics, but it is important to realize that they can read timelines and natural events through energies on the earth and also off people. He said they are good geneticists, because I was asking him about whether they were trying to redesign their bodies to be more humanoid like some of the other reptilian races. And he said that no, that he feels that they are very proud of their bodies and they won't try to create a humanoid raptor being as a result. And it also goes against their grain as to what's right and wrong. I asked him about the Anunnaki and the relationship to the raptors. He said that they relate to the Anunnaki the same way they relate to humans. He says they see the Anunnakis and humans as very much the same. He said the raptor relationship to the Anunnaki, however, has changed over time. He did say the raptors love Mars. Let's see. Regarding global warming due to greenhouse gases, Mark actually thinks this is a reasonable explanation, and he thinks, the ice is melting. He did talk about CMEs and the threat, coronal mass ejections from the sun. He doesn't think we have the equipment to redirect them away from Earth. He says various ET races may have that technology, but that a major CME hitting the Earth directly could happen too fast for them to counteract it. So he sees that as a very big threat. He says there are a few cities underground, obviously for select people to hide out in, but he doesn't feel that it would necessarily protect them even if there was a head-on CME. And he says obviously the underground cities were only going to be good for 1 million people, not billions. He acknowledged that our bases on Moon, Mars, moons of Jupiter and Saturn could be backup plans if they have enough advance notice to prepare for a CME. I also asked him a lot about clones. I wanted to ask him with regard to Donald Marshall, someone who's on the internet claiming quite a bit of things about clones, what he thought about that information. First, I asked him if he thought he was a clone, and Mark says he has not been cloned to his knowledge. He has been tested many times over the years. They always test him to see if his DNA and his blood indicate that he is the same person, and that he doesn't think that he has been cloned either. He says that he doesn't think cloning is as far along as people claim, or that some people claim, I guess, as Marshall is claiming. And he says regarding government officials, some may have been cloned. It's possible, however, clones don't last very long, and they have trouble transferring the memories from a person's past to a clone, so that there'd be many nuances missing, and that they are pretty dumb. And he said that he does not think most of the world leaders have been cloned. He admits Greys can transfer consciousness from body to body. He does not think that the stadiums of cloned actors and so on are actually real, that Donald Marshall is talking about, for what it's worth. I asked him about cloned military leaders in the U.S. He said they would only clone those who have died. He said our military has been tracking our DNA closely and would know anyone who was cloned. He says by 1970 our military was monitoring this and would not allow them to get hold of the human DNA to clone. He said, however, it is possible that Trump has been cloned. The raptors can detect a clone, and that there are several species of alien that can clone consciousness from body to body. He talked briefly about his best friend raptor, the raptor called Naga, and he said that that raptor loves England's Jurassic coast and considers that area home. Regarding supernovas, he said they are a big threat, that you have to travel faster than light to avoid them, and that regardless how deep a base is made underground, that they probably couldn't avoid the effects of a supernova. I had one person asking about the Dyson sphere between us and the sun. He doesn't think that there is one there. However, he said there are lots of Dyson spheres all over the place and outside our solar system. He says there is one in our Oort cloud, and he says there are lots of civilizations in our Oort cloud that we are aware of and need to be aware of. And he said some are causing trouble out there. He said if there was a Dyson sphere between us and the sun, he would know about it. One viewer had asked a question about a solar illuminator in place between the Earth and the sun. That's something that is out on the internet at this time. Mark is not familiar with the term, but he says that no, he doesn't think there is a solar illuminator, again, between us and the sun. He did talk about something called Tabby's World, which is a Dyson sphere we have been watching for hundreds of years, is how he put it, which is quite a provocative statement in and of itself. I'll have to go back and ask him more about that. With regard to North Korea, he said the only reason they're being so aggressive is that they're backed by an alien group that are powerful enemies of the U.S., and he said there's a definite group of off-world beings that back them. He declined to say which group, in which case it does not sound like it's the reptoids, which is interesting. When asked about the North Korean nuclear tests and earthquake weapons, he actually didn't answer me directly about that. He kind of smiled when I asked him about that and didn't say anything, so I asked him, in essence, does that mean that we're actually in war with North Korea and the beings backing them, and that these so-called nuclear tests are more like hits back and forth from each side? And again, he didn't say anything but smiled. So I kind of have the impression that in a sense we are already at war with North Korea. And this is what's really going on behind the scenes. We talked about the Cuban Missile Crisis. He said the Cuban Missile Crisis was not about a Russia-U.S. standoff with missiles. There were 3 nukes that went off in outer space related to that incident. He said the Cuban Missile Crisis involved a fight with an ET race, and that Kennedy was well aware of this. So that's a very interesting piece of history that appears to need to be rewritten and clarified. So I think it would be fascinating to delve into that aspect and also see if we can get some corroboration out there for that. We talked about the technology they use to close the stargates and the wormholes and also to open them and create them. He talked about using particle beam weapons, proton weapons, scalar weapons, and plasma beam weapons. So those are all the kinds of weapons I guess they're using, and that we now can close portals without using a nuke, if I understand it correctly. I mentioned Shiva Nova because I have somebody who has mentioned that to us in the past. He said the engineers at Livermore Labs use many names for the same projects to hide what they're doing, and Shiva Nova is one of them. He reiterated the fact that he had been at Letterman Hospital from 1966 to 1970. He was participating in tests and doing remote viewing at Letterman. And there's more about this on my interview 6 with Mark Richards, as well as possibly some earlier interviews, I have to say. So we talked again about the reptoids and the Draco and their sort of attitudes. And one of the things he said is that the reptoids and Draco are working together. He said the reptoids are superb geneticists and are working to create a more human-looking body. The reptoids are a lot like Dr. Spock. I think he means in the way they behave. And he said the Dracos consider themselves superior to all. They are still involved here on Earth and are in your face and dominating. Actually, I asked him about the dragons in the Middle Ages that are written about, of course, in the mythology, having to do with knights and all of that. And I was curious what dragons were, like which species of reptile or Draco or whatever. He said they are Dracos and raptors. Those are the ones that were actually the dragons they were fighting in the Middle Ages. So apparently, of course, England has a long history surrounding the dragons, as does China, which is interesting. He talked about his access to information. He said, he has a network of contacts both on and off-world sources, as well as his own remote viewing sci-tech skills, which are considerable. He does acknowledge, however, that some information does take time to get to him. But eventually he gets the real story. He was asked by a person who contacted me who felt that he reported to him in the past, whether he would acknowledge that he did report to him. This was a private question, and he said that he could not answer that question as it would endanger whoever it was to be associated with Mark in any way. It's fascinating that Mark would still be concerned to protect anyone out there that he's been associated with. We had a question from a listener who wanted to know about these beings who some had said were a lot like the gargoyles seen on churches and that are found in underground caverns, and that they apparently take over the human body by boring through their eyes, and found in desert areas as well, I think. And Mark is not familiar with that creature. To Mark, that sounded like a chupacabra, and I have to say that sounded like that to me as well. The last thing I asked him was about the sinkholes in Siberia, what's going on with them, and Mark says that's simply permafrost. He said there are lots of earth changes coming and happening now, and that those earth changes are also revealing the caves in various areas, including Siberia. And so that's what's going on with the sinkholes, apparently in Siberia. That's the end of my Total Recall interview 7, and I encourage you to go over the notes that you can find on my website, projectcamelotportal.com. You also have a new URL. You can reach it by projectcamelot.tv, because we're finding that lots of people are encountering blocking to my original URL, and so we've now made another URL, a duplicate site on this other URL. So that covers everything, I believe, and I want to thank everyone for watching and for being interested in what Mark Richards has to say. His wife Joanne is out on the circuit. She has a website, and I will put the URL here, and I encourage you to purchase his written materials as well. He writes constantly and is a prolific writer. He's got lots of information out there in written form, and he's always writing more. So it's really fascinating information. He is a very principled and fascinating individual and highly intelligent, and conducts himself as a military officer at all times. So thanks again for watching and for your support. Thank you.